Maddie Finden. Over at the top, you can also see my colleague, Mona. We are the co-conveners of the Leadership in Early Years Education Research Interest Group. And can we just say, welcome everybody to our third online symposium for the Leadership in Early Years Education Research Interest Group. It is a real pleasure to see so many of you here. It does seem that one of the very few benefits to a global pandemic is actually the shift online has really sort of widened the opportunity for engagement in events like this, particularly for busy practitioners. So somebody wanting to say something there, but yes, so great to see people taking advantage of that opportunity and joining us. So those of you who have participated in our events before will know that the Research Interest Group operates as part of the British Educational Leadership, Management and Administration Society, otherwise known as BELMAS. We'll put the website address into the chat for you so that you can have a little look about what the society does and what the benefits of being a member are. We do highly recommend membership on the basis that it gives you access to very high quality research and excellent networking opportunities internationally as well. So the trajectory of topics over our previous symposiums has sort of gone from identifying the changes that we need to make in order to be responsive to the needs of children and families in this post-COVID world, to then thinking about how we could go about making those changes. And as a community, we seem to have come into an agreement that this starts with consciousness raising about what actually happens in early years education. So in today's session, we therefore focus on how we can use one of the oldest tools in human communication, stories, to get our message across, whether that is to the wider public, the families that use our services, or policymakers. Once again, we've been favoured with three wonderful speakers to share their thoughts and experiences with us. First up, we have Jacqueline Lam. She's the CEO of Indigo Childcare Group, which is based in Glasgow in Scotland. Next, we have Dr. Valerie Daniel. She's the head teacher of Washwood Heath Nursery School in Birmingham, and she is an all-round early years advocate as well. And finally, we have Nicole Lee Mosti, who is an American Early Years Centre Director, who is turned politician in Iceland. So fabulous. Each speaker will be giving us a 10-minute talk, after which I will hand over to my colleague Mona, who will set up the storytelling activities in breakout rooms. And then shortly before 5:30, we'll be returning to the main room to share our stories. And we're hoping to wrap up promptly for 6 o'clock so that we can all go and have our dinners and be with families, etc. So I hope that you will now join me in welcoming our first speaker, Jacqueline Lam. We look forward to hearing from you.
Just checking I was not on mute there. Thanks very much, Maddie. Thanks very much for having me today. This has actually been a really useful exercise for me because, if I'm honest, until Mona and June Sullivan interviewed me last year sometime now, I think, and asked me about storytelling at Indigo, I guess I actually didn't realise just how important it's actually been in our progress over the last 5 years since I started with the organisation. So I'm hoping that just by sharing some examples of Indigo's stories and how we used them, it might help you to recognise where it's already been useful for you and how we can all maybe do it a bit more moving forward. So I suppose, as Maddie said, I'm CEO of the Indigo Childcare Group. Indigo is a social enterprise and a registered charity based in Castlemilk, which is, as Maddie said, is in sunny Glasgow, and it is actually sunny today, believe it or not. It's an area of seriously high deprivation where around 68% of those living in poverty in the community are experiencing the challenges of in-work poverty. and around 54% of families in the community have experienced some of the challenges of being a lone parent family. We've got 2 nurseries, 2 school care provisions, a youth service, a family support service, and a mobile creche at the moment. And we are currently working on the development of 2 new nurseries. One that's an inclusive nursery that will include children with very complex needs, and one that will be a combination indoor-outdoor nursery. So in terms of storytelling, I guess I realised the strength in that for us has been as a strategic communications and an improvement tool, as well as that sort of wider engagement tool for us. If there was a message worth sharing, or that one that I needed buy-in to, then I knew that I needed a story to go with it, to bring it alive, to make it relevant to people. And it really meant that it was much more impactful, more memorable for people. And basically I had a better chance of making some progress with it. So I was really fortunate that from day one in my Indigo journey, I was able to make the space and time to speak individually with all 90 of the staff. I'm just going to pull up some slides here just now and we'll see where it goes. There's not much on them, but it might prevent you having to stare at my face too much. So if you bear with me, let's see. There we go. Yeah, so as I say, I was fortunate that on day one, I was able to make the time and space to speak to all of the staff. I shared my sort of personal story with them, where I'd come from and why I was there, and the thoughts, aspirations and values that I was bringing to the table at Indigo. But I also asked them to share the same with me from their experiences. I learned so much from that exercise. I can't begin to tell you. I learned so much about the people in the organisation as individuals, but also as professionals, and also about the organisation itself, its strengths, its weaknesses, but also its potential. And it really helped me to establish meaningful relationships with the whole team. Also to dispel any debate or myths or rumblings there might have been about the new boss. And when the team saw but it also gave me the information that I needed to start work on the first draft of the business plan for the organisation. And when they saw the initial draft of the plan, they were bought in from the early stages, because they saw their ideas, they saw their language, and so we were off to a pretty good start from that point of view. Part of the vision and aspiration for all of us around that was about embedding a sense of ownership and pride within the organisation, and to instill, I guess, a belief that regardless of where we were from, where we were living, what experience we had, that we could drive forward not just high quality, but outstanding quality if everybody took the lead and their own responsibilities. And I have to say that language like that was key for us. In Scotland, outstanding isn't one of our regulatory grades. It's not a commonly used word. So you can imagine, in the middle of one of Glasgow's most deprived areas, outstanding wasn't really a word that was heard too often or that was used very often. So reinforcing the ambition over and over again, reinforcing that idea of being outstanding and the commitment to being outstanding, and encouraging colleagues to use that kind of language really drove up the energy and the excitement and the belief that actually this outstanding was possible, because look, we've heard stories of the examples of how it's possible. I think one of the sort of key moments for us was in the early stages. There was some prep going on for an inspection, and there was just, I could feel the panic rising and rising and rising in the room. And eventually I sort of pulled everyone together and I said, look, hang on a second. Where are we going with this? Why are we in a panic? Do you believe that we can be outstanding? Have you got lots of stories to tell about how outstanding we are, about the amazing achievements that that our children and families are making, about the innovation that we're using? And they all agreed that yes, that was the case. And I said, well, when Care Inspectorate come in tomorrow, welcome them in, take the lead on that, tell them about those amazing stories that you actually have. Because it's your inspection, not theirs. And I have to say that having that confidence to tell those stories about the things that mattered to them and what was important to them has made just the most outstanding difference to the confidence of our team. And Care Inspectorate and lots of others have mentioned that in terms of the welcoming atmosphere they get when they come in, the gentle and calming atmosphere that there is in the room whilst they're there. But it was clear that we had a lot of work to do around embedding that kind of leadership at every level culture that we were looking for. And there's a particular story that Michelle, who's now our lead officer for attainment, cringes at every time I mention it to her, but she's given me permission to share it today. So again, in my early days, I recall a situation where Michelle was standing in the doorway of my office, and she was telling me this story about bike handles and trikes and £18 and 6 sets of it, and I couldn't understand where this was all going. And eventually I said, so what is it you want from me? And at that point, Michelle said, well, it's about, the handle, the rubber handles that go on the end of the trikes. And it all got confused again. And I said, well, so what we're saying is you want to spend 6 times £18 on something that's going to get our children outside, keep them physically active, develop their coordination. Oh, no. And I thought, where have I gone wrong with this? And she said, it's actually £18 for all 6. And I suddenly thought, hang on a second, I'm having a conversation here about, spending £18 and it's taken 15 minutes for us to do that. So that story in itself helped me to see the need for giving people ownership, putting processes in place, that it wasn't just about the stories, it wasn't just about the culture, it was also about the processes that underpinned those stories that were really important for us. We've got a whole collection of leadership stories now that illustrates our commitment in developing leadership at every level, whether it's about Ruben, who wanted to share his passion for his own language with our children, and now we teach Spanish across all of our nurseries. Or whether it's Frances, whose brother Anthony has a severe complex medical needs, and she's passionate about inclusion, and she's now our inclusion coordinator. Or whether it's about Debbie, who has a real gift for breaking things down and helping people to understand what outstanding practice actually is, and she now leads on all of our in-service programmes. I could go on, but these stories and sharing these stories are what helped us to embed that leadership at every level within the organisation. I'll just check how we're doing for time here. Okay.
We can give you a few more minutes, Jacqueline.
Okay. So, sharing these kind of stories and the story of our growth and progress externally has helped us to secure a really fantastic calibre of directors on our board, and they've been an amazing source of challenge and support for me, but also for the wider team. But they've also saved us a fortune on consultancy fees, it has to be said. It's also helped us to secure account management, being able to give live examples of the progress that the organisation's made, and share them with other organisations out there. It's helped us to achieve account management status with Scottish Enterprise, which is Scotland's sort of business development arm, if you like, within the government. And that's brought us real business credibility as well as funding to support the growth of the organisation. I think it's important to say that it wasn't all good stories that we shared, and I think it's important to have the confidence to share the not so good ones as well. again, one day early on, sitting in on one of our team meetings, I could literally have drawn a line down the centre of the table with people on one side of the table who just got it, as I would describe it, and people on the other side who I guess were very much old school in their thinking in terms of their actual practice with children and families. The topic of the conversation was about a wee girl, 8 years of age, who'd had a bit of a meltdown the day before in out of school care, when she wasn't able to do the activities that she'd hoped to be getting involved in. And one half of the table was saying that, oh, it's all just for attention, she does that all the time. While the other half of the table were absolutely incredulous, saying, you know, but we need to understand why. We need to understand what that's about, why she was behaving like that. There's a reason for that. 9-year-olds don't voluntarily sit under the table and miss out on play. So we need, and there was this ongoing battle happened between them. But I think that in the development of that story and where we took that story in terms of our progression around understanding trauma-informed practice, understanding the importance of resilience within our settings and within our practice, we realised that it wasn't just about Indigo, it was about Castlemilk being a more resilient community. And so that wasn't just us that could do that. And that recognition and that story has helped us share that picture with over 40 different organisations to develop what we now know as the Castlemilk Resilience Hub. The Resilience Hub has got about 40 different members. All of the schools in the community, the local government reps, public health, health improvement, GPs, police, fire, church, housing associations, and all the voluntary sector organisations are all part of it. And we've now got a shared ambition to make Castlemilk a more resilient community, and a shared action plan in order to help us achieve that together. So the relationships that that's built has been pretty huge. And last, but I guess not least, I guess that sharing the stories of our work that we did during COVID has actually kept our organisations afloat. It's kept us in existence. It's strengthened our relationships with families. It's done that in a way that we really could never have imagined us to be able to do. It's allowed us to develop our family support service much faster than we ever planned to. And the commitment from the team has just been fantastic, with 98% of our colleagues in a recent survey saying that Indigo was a great place to work. So that's something that we're all really quite proud of. It's also strengthened our position within the community. It's strengthened the local reputation that we have, because we've got shared stories now. It's not just Indigo stories, it's stories that we have to share together about the trials and tribulations that we had during COVID and how we overcame those. And it's also strengthened our reputation at a national level, informing our strategic direction for our new business plan, the second version of that for the next sort of 3 years. Not to mention, obviously, that it's helped see us through a global pandemic, and I guess nobody ever thought that would be a story that would be able to share in the future. So, you know, all of those stories, sharing them and talking about what we learned from them have been really crucial in the progress at Indigo. And I think people across the organisation now are in a position where they use those stories to be able to introduce people to the organisation, to be able to help others within the organisation understand our culture and where we're coming from, as well as to raise the ambitions and the aspirations of people across the community. So I don't know whether how you want to play, Maddie, if you've got questions, or if you want to sort of move that forward.
Well, that's wonderful. Thanks very much, Jacqueline. I think what we'll do is, yes, if people do have questions, if you can put them in the chat, and we'll save those for the end of the session, because we've got quite a few things to get in there. But I just wanted to say thank you for showing us those different ways in which you're using stories in Indigo practice there. I was particularly struck by the idea that you can listen to the stories of staff, and that in itself helps you as an organisation to identify where there are particular gifts, talents and passions that will help to grow the organisation. I think that's a really wonderful illustration there. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so we'll now be moving on to our next speaker. That's Dr. Valerie Daniel up next. Okay, over to you.
Thank you. Right, I am going to attempt to share my screen. Is that working? Can everybody see?
Yep, looking good.
Okay, good. Right. Let's see if I can. Okay, hold on 1 second. Sorry, I am making a mess of everything. I am trying to find where I do a slideshow from the beginning. Okay, all right, okay, obviously I'm going blind with this. So I will tell you that in human culture, storytelling is a long established tradition. People tell stories for all kinds of reasons: to entertain, to transfer knowledge, to pass on knowledge and information and traditions, to maintain cultural heritage, or to warn others of danger. If you want to understand the power of storytelling, we only need to refer to October 1938, when Orson Welles broadcasted his version of the book War of the Worlds, prompting mass panic in the US. The radio broadcast took the form of a fictional news report, but large parts of the population actually believed there was an alien invasion taking place. So we have to look at the fact that a fundamental aspect of storytelling is human emotion. The basic values of people and groups are projected into stories. Stories teach us how to live, how to behave, both consciously and unconsciously. Stories are dynamic. They're created by individuals, groups, communities, cultures, societies, and nations, and they're a powerful leadership tool. So I think most people would probably agree that language consists of a system of symbols. However, explanations of linguistic structures should also include the dynamical aspects that are involved in the use of language. We have to look more closely at how the dynamics of language relate to the symbolic aspect of language, and storytelling exemplifies the fusion of these two aspects beautifully. The neuroscience of storytelling. If you think of times when you can't switch off after a movie, or when after you've put down a novel that you've been reading, you can't switch off from that story, or the times when you just can't, you can't connect with a story at all. So as human beings, we're actually programmed for stories. They're a part of who we are. It is how we evolved to understand our place in the world before we had written language. Essentially, our brains run on electrical pulses, and when we hear stories, our brains light up. When our neurons are triggered in this way, it helps us to remember more of the information that we are receiving. So I sort of thought about 4 elements that would break down the context of storytelling and why it's so powerful. And those 4 elements are relatability, novelty, fluency, and suspense and tension. So why are memes so successful? Because they tell a story that is relatable. If your audience can relate to you, you remove any barriers to them hearing your story and remembering your story. Novelty is the state of being original, new, or unique. Novelty is significant because the human brain is always on the lookout for something new or unique to latch onto. When we spot something new, it excites us and captures our attention. As a nod to the pandemic, let us use masks, for example. This blue mask is functional. We know what it does. It's there to protect us. But the other masks speak to us in a different way because it makes us want to look and hear and learn something else. So if your story has a frame of reference that has some originality to it, then it helps the listener to retain. Fluency is the concept of having pace, of having self-expression, of understanding, of putting across your story in a way that holds people's attention. Fluency adds to comprehensibility, and this makes storytelling effective. Listeners want to emotionally invest in your story. You're able to hold your listeners' attention when they want to know what happens next. Tension and suspense is not a static force. Tension rises. It is the role of the storyteller to tell of the obstacles, the potential for failure, and the actions to overcome. That keeps your listeners coming with you. So I have a story. My story as an early years leader. Stories have power. They reach people on a level that facts and figures can't. By thinking of my career as a narrative with a plot and characters, and by making my story relatable with its own unique twist, and the fluency that comes from authenticity and the buildup of suspense, I might be able to inspire others to leadership in the early years. Hopefully, that's the hope. So this is me. I am a mother of 2 sons. I have an amazing granddaughter who is 4 years old, going on 14. I am a head teacher and I'm 61 years old. So I'm at the stage in my life where I have no clue what I'm doing next. I may be old in body, but definitely not in mind, and I'm not figuring what's going to happen. So I have some tension about what happens, what the next phase of my life is going to look like. But my journey, I'm an import from Jamaica, came to study business management for a year. At the end of that year, my uncle, who was then the deputy mayor of Lewisham, says to me, there's a chronic teacher shortage. You're a teacher, you're a qualified teacher. We need your help. I wasn't sold on that because I'd spent my life running away from teaching. I grew up in a family of teachers, and it kind of grated on me a bit that everybody just expected me to slot into the family profession and be a teacher. So although I qualified as a teacher in Jamaica, the first thing I did was go into hotel management, nothing to do with teaching. So, coming here, I did business management and still ended up being a teacher. So I lived in London for 15 years. And when my uncle asked, I became a supply teacher for Lewisham initially. And then I got a job in a school. I had to join what was called the Overseas Licensed Teachers Program at that time to complete my QTS year. And then after that, 7 years doing that, I decided to open my own nursery, and I did that for 7 years. You may ask why. In all honesty, I knew I wanted to be in leadership, but I wasn't getting recruited for the leadership roles that I was going for. So luckily, I suppose for me, my son's nursery went up for sale, so I decided to buy it and get on with it. So after 7 years, my husband decided he wanted to come back to Birmingham to be closer to his family. And here we are in our moving van, headed back to Birmingham. I had to set up my business. So there was trepidation coming here. I wasn't sure where my journey was going to go to next. And I have very strong beliefs as an early years educator. I was really worried that those wouldn't translate when I came to Birmingham, because I no longer had the freedom to do what I did, owning my own business. My mother was a phenomenal early years pedagogue, and I learned a lot from her. So the thing that I found really difficult was that leadership in my PVI nursery was very lonely for me. It took a lot of courage to build, not courage, took strength and a lot of, being present there to encourage a culture that had a solid underpinning of early years pedagogy. And directing that fell squarely on my shoulders. So leadership was essentially a very lonely place for me. I had never heard about nursery schools until I came to Birmingham. And the first time I heard about it was when I saw an ad for a children's centre teacher. And as I was saying, I really worried that as a school, I was going to struggle with my philosophy on working in early years. But that was not the case. In nursery schools, it was a very strong ethos of early years pedagogy and continued professional development. So I was there for, I think, 5 years before I decided that I would take on headship for myself. Now, suddenly, I found myself the head teacher of the largest nursery school in Birmingham, with over 50 staff, consisting, because it was also a children's centre. And I also had a separate site to manage. So all my dreams, everything I'd ever dreamed of, I now had. I could tell you that leadership is easy but that would be a lie, in all honesty. I could tell you that nothing would ever go wrong, but that is also not true. What I can tell you is you will never be bored. You will always be learning. You learn how to respond and how to manage change and how to create and develop a vision with your staff, how to use strategic thinking to achieve the vision and deal with challenges along the way, how to manage people, even the difficult ones. And how to work with their strengths, and how to persuade and influence your team towards a vision that we're developing. You learn to find various ways to communicate, grow your skills and the skills of the staff that you have with you. Now, this is what my vision looked like. This is my school with forest schools and all kinds of exciting things that you can see happening. With my team, we took the school from good to outstanding in a year and did the same with the children's centre and the daycare. Now, I know you're looking at that and thinking, what the heck does Neapolitan ice cream have to do with learning? Well, at least I hope you are, because yeah, that is a leadership story that I tell about children's learning. So in a nutshell, building cognitive competences is about the deeper understanding of information and the ability to apply knowledge in different contexts. contexts, that means far more than the capacity to regurgitate rote and surface knowledge. And this is addressed by the concept of deeper level learning, which, because I'm a foodie, comes down to Neapolitan ice cream. So we can skate along on the vanilla bit if we're just, touching the surface of learning. We can dip down to the strawberry when we start unpicking it a bit, or we can delve down into the chocolate, which is where the really good stuff is. So the concept behind deeper level learning is dialogue, making the time to talk about children's interests, their learning and their development. So I have a number of these stories for different aspects of my leadership journey. And I feel honored today to share the path to my leadership. But I have stories about barriers, finances, people management, resources, loss, struggle, victory, friendship. I could keep going. Parents, the Reggio ethos is based on the philosophy of Loris Malaguzzi, and he speaks about the 100 languages. He's of the opinion that education is overly reliant on one language, that's verbal language, to the exclusion of the languages of dreaming, playing, questioning, exploring, music, dancing, all those different languages. I believe our storytelling is enriched with these languages, as these experiences are infused in experiences for children and consequently in the leadership journey for leaders. Childhood is perceived as a special time of love, socialization, and protection of children. But we know that childhood is not a fixed universal experience. It is a relative experience that is dependent on a number of social factors. As early years educators, we have a duty to ensure that we hold on to childhood for children and that we fight for an education system where children thrive. They have equal opportunities to learn. Children have joy, children shine, and they are happy. And I have one more slide because the story doesn't end there. My story is a continuing story. I successfully applied for my doctorate in education at the University of Birmingham. I wrote my thesis on the perceptions of the leadership crisis in the early years sector, which is relevant at the moment and very topical in the current times. This pandemic has presented further opportunities for me to evolve. Just before lockdown, I was asked by my friend Aaron Bradbury what I was going to do with my research, and he just wouldn't let me rest. He kept on and on until he eventually set up an evening with Dr. Valerie Daniel at the university he was working at the time and live streamed it on Twitter. Now, if you know me, I had no idea what was happening, but he was just like, just run with me. I'm like, okay, I'm here, carry on. So that happened, and my life has never been the same since. George Floyd's death made me a fierce advocate for children's rights and for speaking up about equalities, diversity, and inclusion in early years environments. I now work for Nottingham Trent University, developing and delivering their equalities, diversity, and inclusion module. I am regularly asked to present for conferences. I now write blogs and I do podcasts and I get interviewed for radio shows. And I've also done a stint as a radio show host for Teacher Hub Radio for their Childhood Chatter segment that comes on a Saturday. So this is me. I'm old, but definitely not cold. So thank you for listening to my story of early years leadership. And I sincerely hope that there was a message in sharing my story. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Valerie, and what a story. I think your expertise with narrative doesn't stop there as well, because I believe you're a sometime poet as well. I think I've seen
yes.
a little poem floating around the internet by yourself.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah.
So yes, absolutely wonderful there. And again, the idea that sharing stories can just have so many different impacts on what it is we were doing. When you're sharing your story with us, we got this very, very clear idea of your influences and your passions and your values, but also part of a wider picture there. We're picking up from your story the barriers that are faced within the sector and leadership within the sector. So that lack of support there and that need for better leadership development. So yes, very, very powerful. And thank you ever so much for sharing with us. So without further ado, let's please move on to Nicole.
Hi, can't thank enough for being here. I'm trying to find my language. I'm a native English speaker, but on some days my brain doesn't really know what language it wants to speak, Icelandic or English. But in preparing for today's talk, I took a few minutes to reflect on what I really wanted for you to take away from this, and from my experience, my story, my vision. As we all know, stories are visions. That's where they start. And at the end, when you look back, someone else sees them, maybe the importance of your vision. And I wanted to really sort of talk about how my passion for early childhood education, I'll just say ECE from here out, could perhaps inspire someone else to write another story or take my story further. My journey is pretty long, actually quite crazy, with lots of elements coming from America, living in Iceland, having traveled the world in relation to different things related to early childhood education. But probably one of the most important things was early on, I realized the place that early childhood education and strong leadership has to do with community and building community. And I think that some of the things that both Val and Jacqueline spoke about and the roles that they play and the different programs that they've run, this echoes through towards what I'll say here. Just in relation to my journey to the one center that I ran, I will just say I took over a school that was defined as in crisis, or as one director had said to me, "You don't want to apply for that school, it's broken." You guys said, "No, we don't accept that." And by the time that I left the school, we were featured on CNN as an answer to equality and working against child poverty with the practices we were doing in our school, which, you know, CNN isn't in Iceland, so it's a pretty big deal. Anyway, in my reflections, I landed on the idea that I really wanted to convey here to all of you the opportunities that we alone as early childhood leaders, and because I believe we're all leaders, whether we work as a director or as we work as the leader in the kitchen or gate control, whatever it is we do, we all have a role in leadership to play and how we can change society. I've really come to understand that ECE is the soil in which we plant the seeds of change. We do not only care for and educate young children and their families, but we prepare them for society. And through our actions and our advocacy, we can prepare society for them. It's my belief that in our leadership roles, in all of our organizations, centers, institutions, schools, whatever we choose to call them, we need to take as much space as we can to share and create our stories about what we do and what we learn with the community and with greater society. Leaders who view the role from a social perspective take part in empowering everyone to lead in early years. We do so through developing methods to share ownership and creating change based on the needs and ideas of our community, whether that community be in our school, our neighborhood, the city we live in, the state we live in, or the country we live in, because we do know a lot of people that are here, they've taken on these roles, they're advocates. We do so through developing methods to share the ownership and creating change based on the needs of our community, I said that, and the values that are at the heart of what we do and what we teach. And I guess you could go so far to say, as if I added here from the previous speakers, what we learn along the way, how our stories are created. As a leader, our goal should never just be about running a good center or meeting educational standards that are set outside of our center, or just being efficient in our management skills. It should be about creating stories and sharing them. You know, it's great to have your budget right on, and it's great to have, but it's more important to have courage to run a small deficit in order to create change that affects the lives of children and families and the communities in a positive way. I believe that true leadership reflects that ever important value at the heart of early childhood is about taking risks to support development at all levels, setting precedents and proving points, which strengthens ECE. Those are the stories that we want to read. Those are the stories that we want to read, and those are the stories that we all want to create. Remember that at the heart of what we do, these are human beings that we're dealing with. We're working with our staff, all the way down to the babies and the families. Everybody and everything is in a state of development. Educational centers, especially early childhood centers, are at the heart of a community, and development stems from the heart. We know this. There are families who live in the same community as your center, and the different ways that you can connect and insert the learning and the development from your center into the different areas of your community and community development creates a space for more leaders to influence change. Development is something that always needs to be continuous. We can never allow it to be hindered. It can't be static or contained. It has to always be in motion, even if at some times it's backwards motion. We need to grip those moments and reflect in those moments and use that reverse motion to influence moving in a positive direction, having then an ever more important effect on the stories we create in development. I think to myself sometimes that if Piaget would come back right now and he would look at what we're doing today, would he say the same things? Would he be happy to see people parroting what he talked about way back when without thinking more carefully about whether it really applies to today's world, today's children, the communities that we are developing in? Education, in my belief, is the single most important system we have in any society to develop change and to empower individuals. It's my belief that ECE and through ECE and the stories we tell, that we're the first stop in that system, that we have a very distinct role to play in leading and at the very least influencing change and the evolution of education. We have the power to write our own stories. In many ways, we don't get enough credit or the credit we deserve. And this can inhibit us from wanting to develop our stories. Funding at a local and federal levels doesn't reflect the needs or the potential that exist within our field. Regulations can set limits to how we educate and develop our centers. Emphasis on how our teachers are educated is limited in scope, in my belief. But we do have space to influence change, and we need to take risks and set examples. In my school, we took steps to work with other institutions and to service providers in a manner that empowered my staff in understanding the importance of being passionate about children, development, education, and community. We did things like we created language courses for parents of foreign origin. We invited nurses and social workers into the center to do their work and conduct interviews or get closer to families. We allowed the community to use our school for meetings. We took the initiative to bridge over to the local primary school to set our own standards for what school preparedness was and to convey the wishes of our parents for how they needed to be supported in adjusting to primary school. Allow me to elaborate. For a lot of parents, young parents, or parents new to your neighborhood or even your country, your early childhood center, it could be the very first step in understanding how society works. You are the first person who could influence their story, their acclamation, their potential in the new society. We are an inlet, and depending on how we view our roles and how we develop our stories as this inlet to society, we influence how we support those families and the children and even our staff in understanding how we can be active participants in our community. In our centers, we take on a role of teaching both children and families how to function and to succeed. And we have space to set norms and create safe windows to view society through. Because after all, what are stories? We're looking through a window. We're reading a book that happens in another place in another time. We can, lead this. I've worked and visited many centers around the world, and in each center, it serves a different community. And that really matters that we understand that. It influenced me a lot to understand that when it came to learning the importance of the community my center was in, and the potentials that I had and that center had, that we were presented with as a leader to learn and grow. At each center, there were different emphases because of distinctiveness of that community and the people there. I was thinking about Fabadu, a center I visited in Dortmund, where they worked with providing social opportunities for immigrants and refugees seeking to learn German and connect with Germans through creating a coffee and sewing club for women to drop into in the basement. In Greece, I worked in the only early childhood center set up in a refugee camp in all of Europe. It worked. It was set up by a charity organization, SOS Children's Villages, and the goal was to give children an escape from camp life and provide them with normal childhood and security and happiness, and for parents to understand the importance of education and social development that those children needed. In both of those places, there were leaders at every level of the center who influenced those programs and those families and those children. There are different families and there are different needs in every community and in every school. It's really important that we understand that. We support their stories through our leadership. We also have to recognize that people who work in early childhood centers are also members of communities. The more space you give in your leadership role and the amount of effort you place in empowering your staff to be active participants in the development of your center, the more you open them up to the same thing in their communities. Empower them because they can make a difference beyond beyond just your center and in the wider community and in advocating for early childhood development, therefore creating more stories. Just to get into a little bit of theory, so it's not just me, I reflect a lot about the fact that if you put your centers into the Brafenbenner package, as I like to call it, and you look at your role as a leader, that you're the mediator that moves between the different systems of context. We're the influencers that move context through the micro, meso, exo, and macro systems and back again. It's my belief that in our roles as leaders, if we don't strive to carry everyone forward through the different systems and utilize what we know from the micro to influence the exo and macro systems, ECE won't evolve and it won't move forward. And our story could perhaps become irrelevant, which I don't really want to think about. A final thought I'd like to inject here is regarding how I view and practice leadership in relation to ECE and our role in community development. That's where it all started, and I want to finish there. I want to mention how I'm so inspired by Howard Gardner's theories of multiple intelligences. It resonates deeply with me because I've worked in such diverse environments, and I've learned it's really important to always see and understand the municipality, the multiplicity of interest and strengths among our staff and within our community. As a leader, I feel you need to be able to utilize these interests and strengths in order to motivate and empower staff while influencing change. You create opportunity for continual development and progress, and you'll have fun doing so. Progress and continual development coupled with having fun, they're not only motivating factors within our organizations, they're outwardly motivating within your community, and they're infectious and they're empowering. Those are stories that people don't only want to read, they want to write and be a part of. I hope I made it in 10 minutes.
Well done. Thanks ever so much, Nicole. Fascinating again there. And again, some really interesting points there. I like the parallel that you were making between early years education and the nature of stories in themselves, that there is this forward trajectory in both of them. Early years education is a story. And yes, the bioecological model, Bronfenbrenner, one of my favorites. The idea that the early years leader is a mediator between the different systems within the bioecological model. And I suppose ultimately what we're saying here is that the story is the tool that the leader needs to be able to mediate between those different systems. It's the tool that will help them to inform the wider policymakers about what is happening on the ground and where that investment needs to go. So lovely. Thank you ever so much. Mona, over to you.
Fabulous. Okay, thank you so much for those presentations. I'm feeling very inspired. Now, this is about listening and having a cup of tea and getting some good stories yourself, but it's also a call to action. So this is about telling more stories about early years leadership, or about early years in general as leaders. Telling more stories so that we can boost early years, so that we can enable it to flourish, whether that's by improving practice or by increasing the value that parents and wider society place on early years, or how about even the politicians, maybe using stories to get them to care about early years and demonstrate some of that care in a concrete way. So let's tell more stories, and let's start now. So we're going to practice. We're going to break into groups for just 10 minutes. We're going to keep this really punchy. And we're going to try and come up within our groups with a story. So there are some things to think about here. Think about, who is this story about early years? Who is it for? You know, is it for practitioners? Is it for parents? Is it for children? Is it for wider society? Is it for politicians? Who do you want to tell the story to? What's the message of the story that you want to tell? And who is the protagonist of this story? Is it a child? Is it professional? Is it a parent? Who do you want to tell this story about? What journey is this protagonist going to go on? You know, Val mentioned that suspense and that tension that makes a story a story. A story is only a story when there's a journey that the protagonist goes on. So what is the journey of our protagonist in this case? And what are the turning points? What are the moments that as an audience, we're kind of on the edge of our seat waiting to see what happens and what happens as a result? So it's audience, it's message, it's protagonist, it's journey, and it's turning points. And I will broadcast those to the breakout rooms as well, because I realized that I didn't say to grab a pen and paper and jot those down. So we'll spend 10 minutes in our groups, and then we'll come back together again. And we won't attempt to tell whole stories, but we'll get a flavor from each of the groups about what you've managed to come up with. Okay, so I'm about to drop you into your breakout room, so you'll get an invite message on your screen. So please just click join. 3 things that I'm going to do before we hand over to Maddie to kind of close this event. So we're already at 5:40, so we're going to go boom, boom, boom through those 3 things. So I'm going to come round to each room and just get a sense of the discussion of the story. So don't worry, you don't need to go in full-blown storytelling mode, but just give us a flavor of the story that you were developing, or where the conversation was going. That would be wonderful. The second thing we're going to do is announce the results of a poll, a small poll that myself and Maddie designed to look at the stories that we want to tell about early years, and just kind of look together at what was the most popular story to be told about early years according to that poll. And then the third thing I'll do is hand over briefly to Vicky Veal, who is doing some really, really relevant PhD research around early years professionals and storytelling. She'll have more to say, but she'd just love to connect with people around that. And so we'll give her a minute on the floor, if that's okay, Vicky, just to say a bit more. Okay, so you don't need to have remembered which room you're in, because I've got the list of names here. So we've got in room 1, we had Cassie, we had Elizabeth, Jacqueline, Liz, Val, and Nicole. So anybody there just want to say something about the discussion that you were having?
Oh, I'll go. It's always tricky, isn't it, when you've had a group and we didn't pre-arrange who was going to speak, but I'll go. And we were very lucky we had all 3 speakers in our group. So yeah, it was just a good group to get started. We didn't even really scratch the surface. It's just not there's just so many questions within those questions you posed, Mona, but we spoke a lot about who the story is for and how we kind of get to the point where we can actually make some changes with this story, and about whether that is with local authority or whether it's with national government, or is it within the kind of wider society that who do we need to speak to and tell these stories that all of us have, and just how to kind of really define just how important the story can be from the impact of an early childhood education. So from a high quality ECE, then what can that do for adults and our society as a whole? And that kind of really trying to focus in on that longevity of looking much further past just primary school, or, you know, following on to different points in their life that can be pinpointed back to their early years, and what a difference that can make. But yeah, very tricky to answer in a short amount of time, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cassie, for sharing. I'll come to room 2 straight away. I've got a million things I want to say, but I'm going to sit on my hands and make myself be shush. So I'll
dive in here quickly because I was in there, and yes, so very briefly, we looked at a couple of different types of stories that seem to be quite common across early years education. Meredith talked about the unfinished, the unresolved story, which is quite an old story in early years education. You get these bright initiatives, there's lots and lots of energy at the beginning, and then it just disappears into nothing. So there's a lot of unresolved stories in early years education. And John then he was talking particularly about the current situation and the impact that it is having on early years practitioners and leaders. And yes, I sort of drew a parallel here with David and Goliath, that we're feeling like these sort of small individuals who are dealing with something that's very, very big. But John pointed out it's sort of worse than that, because there are all these handicaps as well, because resources have been cut, and they sort of he's going about things blindfolded as well. So that was the other story that we were looking at there. And then finally, stories of both undervaluing the role of early years leadership, but also feeling undervalued as well, and not feeling that we have the autonomy or the potential for leadership within them. Okay, thanks.
Fabulous. Thanks, Maddie. Although on a positive note, how amazing is the story of David and Goliath? You know, so yes, it's rubbish to be David, but the story is an incredible one. Okay, and then in room 3, we've got Charlotte, Claire, Denise, Fatin, Lewis, Lindsay, Sarah, and Vicky. Let's have just some little taster from you guys.
We got stuck on who the stories are for, and didn't get past that point, but decided very much that actually maybe the people who need to hear these stories first are those within the sector, so that we can build that confidence. We can show them that they are the protagonists, they are the ones, they've got more power than they think, and that's what makes them valuable. And that then hopefully will give the sector the courage to come together to share those stories more widely within society and at policy level, etc.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vicky. Yes, so much is about identity, and I think that came through in every single presentation and hopefully in every kind of conversation. It's so much about building that sense of identity and pride, I guess. Maddie and I, as I was mentioning, we ran a small poll, and I'm really pleased because actually Professor Julie Nicholson has joined the call, and it's thanks to her really that we were able to run this poll, because what we did was take 3 messages that have been kind of shared about early years in various ways from various organizations, but in the context of California. Correct me if I'm wrong, Julie. And we looked at which were the most popular among early years educators, which were the ones, what was the story that they felt they wanted to tell. So I'm just going to share my screen and show you the options, and then let you know which one was overwhelmingly the most popular. So here we are. So we have this as our first option: you get medical care because she has childcare. So the message being very much about the kind of absolute essential role that ECE has to play in terms of, enabling the economy to keep going. Our second option was this one: a more kind of coherent, collaborative way of thinking about it, collective way of thinking about it, children learning, parents earning, communities growing. So trying to see things from multiple perspectives. Our third option was this: 90% of a child's brain develops before they're 5. So we borrowed each of these stories, as I was saying, from kind of similar context, but they come at it very differently. This, the one that's currently on your screen, this was overwhelmingly the most popular in terms of the story that people want to tell about early years, about the message that people want to give. And I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because it comes back to the child and what is happening for the child. You know, yes, obviously early childhood education enables people to go out to work. But maybe the bit that inspires us the most and the bit that we really need to be kind of pushing out there and telling the stories about is this makes a difference for children, because the changes that they are going through in those earliest years of life are ginormous and can never be underestimated. So just kind of thinking about that in relation to your conversations and the stories that you are coming up with is really interesting. Now I'm going to hop over to Vicky, who's just going to say a little bit about her research and invite connections.
Thank you so much for letting me speak. I'm currently doing my educational doctorate, and I'm focusing on the lived experiences of those who lead early years provision in maintained settings. And my background is as a qualified teacher working predominantly in school settings, but I did also work in Sure Start centres and nurseries. And I know how lonely it is to be the only early years practitioner in a school, to be the only person speaking up for early years, and the kind of conflicts and the courage and the guts it takes to do that when you are constantly dealing with a lack of understanding, a lack of value about play-based pedagogy, when you don't even have a shared vision, shared values, a shared language between the senior leadership team and the early years specialists. So I'm really looking at capturing the stories of qualified teachers in maintained early years settings, whether they're nurseries or reception classes. Because I work in ITE, I'm focusing on really how well prepared they feel for the battles they face. So what are the battles? What are those points? What are the points of conflict? What battles do they face? How well prepared for them are they? How much support do they have? Where do they go to for support? I'm sure we're all part of various Facebook groups and Twitter groups and things that we turn to on a bad day to see, you know, is there anybody else out there who feels the same way? And I'd really like to sort of use those stories to do 3 things. To first of all, illuminate what the factors are that shape their practice, to look at what the implications are for ITE and for professional development, because I do also feel, having had the experience of doing my master's, that there isn't enough focus for qualified teachers. You're pushed into certain pathways, but they're not early years specific. So you spend half of every essay trying to explain what early years is to a non-specialist, which is soul destroying. And finally, to sort of look at the lessons that can be learned from that to support retention, because we know we have a retention crisis in the sector. We know that to do the best for the children, we want well-qualified workforce, but we're not going to get that if people keep having their souls destroyed, keep leaving. So if anybody knows any qualified teachers in maintained early years settings, or if any of you have been one, listening to you, Val, I was really interested in your story. And if anybody would be willing to just connect with me so that I can capture some of those stories, because I really don't want them all to be from my students. I'm avoiding that. Just getting the wider story. I'd really love to hear from you. Thank you.
So Vicky, could you just put your email address or Twitter handle or something in the chat for us now?
Sure, thank you for that.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Vicky. And it's interesting, when Vicky and I had a chat, we realized that all the metaphors and the stories that we were talking in terms of were battles, which is maybe not so early years-ish, but it can often feel like a real battle. Maddie, I'll hand over to you now to wrap things up.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, I'd like to thank our speakers today for sharing 3 very distinctive talks with us. I think there was a lot to be learned about what stories are, the power that they have, and the different sources that we can get them from, and the different uses that we can put them to. There are certainly some important lessons that I'm going to be taking away from today. As usual, we have recorded this session, and we will be making the recordings available via the usual 3 outlets. So it'll be on the Middlesex pages, the Birmingham pages, and the Belmas pages. We will tweet out the links to these. And please, if you do have any questions or interesting comments you would like to make about today, please do put them on our Twitter. And yeah, we would love to continue the conversation with you. I do hope that some of you will share your stories with Vicky, because we'd be really interested, all of us, to have a look at those and think about what this means for us next. Certainly in the pipeline, we know that we have more work to do about getting our story across as a community of early years leaders. And Mona and I are currently thinking about how we might go about doing that. And we would certainly welcome, suggestions from all of you on that. So it turns out that John is actually Mike. Yes, thank you. Yes, that would be great if you could help us. I regret calling you John now for the entirety of our chat earlier. Okay, so yes, just remains for me to say thank you ever so much for all of you. Thanks for coming along, for taking part. Really, really rich discussions, and we hope to see you again at the next event. Enjoy your evenings.
Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.